Another day is here, and you're ready for it. What to wear? Check. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Check. Planning for what's next and how to save for it? That's where Bank of America can help. For your financial to-dos, Bank of America has experts ready to help get you closer to your goals. Get started at one of our local financial centers or 24/7 in our mobile banking app. Find a location near you at bankofamerica.com/talktous. What would you like the power to do? Mobile banking requires downloading the app and is only available for select devices. Message and data rates may apply. Bank of America N.A., member FDIC.
The Two-Footed Podcast is brought to you by EPLindex.com and our presenting sponsor, Liberty Shield. Liberty Shield is a VPN provider. A virtual privacy network allows you to go online, change your location, access things you're geo-blocked from, while keeping your data safe. So, as an example, if you are a UK expat and want access to BBC iPlayer to watch Match of the Day, or ITV Hub, or all four, but you get that message that says this content is not available in your location, a Liberty Shield VPN gets you around that block, allows you to watch whatever you want on those services while also keeping your data safe. And it goes further than that. It allows you to open up Netflix's entire library by just changing your IP address. Liberty Shield is the #1 rated VPN provider on Trustpilot with 5-star ratings across the board. So go to libertyshield.com right now, use the code EPL25 and get either the hardware package or the software package. The hardware package is a router that you plug into your existing router, and any item you want to change the IP address on, be it your phone or your television, you connect that to the new Liberty Shield router. All other items can remain connected to your existing router. There's also a software package, which is instantly downloadable to your device and you can get using straight away. Again, libertyshield.com, EPL25 for 25% off at checkout. We're also brought to you by Home of Hopcroft, a giftware and homeware company located in Scotland but shipping worldwide. Check out homeofhopcroft.co.uk and do check out the EPL Index and Anfield Index shops, which you'll find on Etsy. Use the codes EPL10 or RED10 for 10% off at checkout. And lastly, do remember to check out A Tad Predictable, hosted by Tadiwa. That podcast is on this feed before every Premier League match week. And then the EPL Roundtable, hosted by Kevin DeVries, on its own EPL Roundtable feed. So just search EPL Roundtable in your podcast device. And that's out after every match week. Now, on with the show. What's good, boys and girls? Two-Footed Podcast. Today is Friday. It is the 31st of May. It is the day before the European Cup final, which will take place at Wembley between Real Madrid and Borussia Dortmund. So today we're basically going to focus in on that, and most importantly on the history of the European Cup and the finals that we've seen. So thought we'd take an old wander down nostalgia lane, because why not? And it's funny to think of where we are now versus what we've seen in the past in this tournament. Like, you just couldn't imagine now 4 years of Dutch clubs winning the European Cup. If someone said to you that that was going to happen, you'd think they were off their head or that something bizarre had happened. But that's exactly what happened in 1970, 71, 72, and 73. In 1970, Feyenoord beat Celtic 2-1 to claim their first European Cup. Celtic were going for their second, having beaten Inter Milan. But again, think of that. If someone said to you that there'd be a Scottish club that would get to 2 European Cup finals in 4 years, you'd just never believe them. It's so funny how football changes so drastically and what money has done to the game. So if we start with that 1970 final, Celtic go 1-0 up. Tommy Gemmell, the left back, scoring on 30 minutes. Rinus Israel, the Feyenoord captain, equalises 2 minutes later. And Bengt Kindvall, Swedish striker, scores the winner in 117th minute. Deep into extra time. In 1971 then, Ajax beat Panathinaikos by 2-0. Dick Van Dyke, not that Dick Van Dyke, this is a different Dick Van Dyke. His name was actually Dirk, but he went by Dick. He gets the first, and Ari Hahn gets the second as they win 2-0. 1972, it's Ajax again. 2 goals from Johan Cruyff was the difference as they beat Inter Milan in Rotterdam. And in 73, Ajax made it 3 in a row, this time at the Red Star Stadium in Belgrade, with Johnny Rep scoring the only goal of the game in the 5th minute as Ajax run out 1-0 winners. 1974 then. We've just had 3 in a row. Nice to get a bit of change, but we get another 3 in a row. And this time it's Bayern. Now in the first game, we get a 1-1 draw. 0-0 at full time. But Luis Aragonés scores in the 114th minute. And Hans-Jörg Schwarzenbach, I think I've said that right, Schwarzenbach scores in the 120th minute. That's how close Atleti have been to having 2 European Cups. Because you'll all remember the Sergio Ramos goal, and we'll get to that when we get to it. But back in 1974, they almost won the European Cup. In the replay, they got absolutely trucked. This game was played at the Heysel Stadium in Brussels, which had been full for the first leg. But 2 days later, 23,000 people. Uli Hoeneß scores 2, and Gerd Müller gets 2. And Bayern begin their run of dominance in this competition. The following year, they beat Leeds United. That's the great Leeds team of Billy Bremner, John Giles, Joe Jordan, Alan Clark, Norman Hunter. Jimmy Armfield was manager at this point. Don Revie had moved on. But Franz Roth and Gerd Müller scored in the Parc des Princes to give them a 2-0 win over Leeds. To give Bayern a 2-0 win over Leeds. And then the following year, Bayern made it 3 in a row, this time beating St. Etienne at Hampden Park. And again, Franz Roth scoring in a European Cup final. 1977 then, we do get change. And no team would win 3 in a row again until Real Madrid did it in the 2010s. However, what we get here is we get a run of 6 years of English clubs winning the European Cup. So Liverpool are up first. They go 1-0 up through Terry McDermott. Alan Simonson equalises in the 51st minute. But then Tommy Smith and a Phil Neal penalty gave Liverpool their first European Cup under Bob Paisley. In 78, Liverpool would win it again. Kenny Dalglish with the only goal of the game to beat Club Brugge at Wembley in front of 92,500 people. Liverpool become the first English team to win it in back-to-back years. And, you look at that team, Phil Thompson, Ray Clemens, Emlyn Hughes, Graham Souness, Kenny Dalglish, star-studded. Some of the greatest players in Liverpool's history. The team the year before had been very different. See, people don't remember that Liverpool changed their team drastically after winning the 77 European Cup. None of the 3 Scots were in the team in 77. Kevin Keegan was the star name. Keegan played up front with Steve Highway, Ray Kennedy, left wing, Ian Callaghan right wing, Jimmy Case and Terry McDermott in the middle of the park, Neil Smith, Hughes and Joey Jones in the defensive line. Ray Clemens was in goal. But again, like I say, the following year, it changed quite drastically. Clemens in goal. Neil is at right back. Thompson's now in at centre back next to Hansen. So a brand new centre back pairing. Emlyn Hughes is playing left back this time. Case is there. Kennedy's there. McDermott is still there, but Souness is in. And it's a new front two in Dalglish and Highway. Sorry, Dalglish and Fairclough. Steve Highway is on the bench, and he comes on for Jimmy Case. Joey Jones and Ian Callaghan, who'd been in the team the previous year, they also would be on the bench, but they would not play. In 1979, then, part of, I believe, the greatest story in the history of English football, Brian Clough taking over a mid-table second division team, leading them to promotion, winning the first division, what we now call the Premier League, at the first attempt, going into the European Cup and winning it. They beat Malmo 1-0. And Trevor Francis scores the only goal of the game. And for those who don't know, Trevor Francis was English football's first £1 million player. But it didn't really work out for him at Forest. At Birmingham, he'd been a superstar in the making. But a combination of injuries and not always getting on all that well with Clough meant that while he did have success, he didn't reach the same level as a player with Forest. And after going for such a huge amount of money, he was only 25 when he arrived. He was gone 2 years later. And part of that he spent on loan. He would be sold on to Manchester City. Now, they made their money back because he was a big name. But City were desperate for clout at that point. They'd been through that great spell with Lee Bell and Summerby. They'd had success with that team. That team had aged out, been sold. Colin Bell had gotten injured. They were desperate to rebuild and get back to that level. And they saw that English football was in this really powerful moment where, without question, it was the best league in the world. English teams were the best teams in Europe. And City wanted to be part of that. So they spent big money on Trevor Francis. He did okay there. He had a pretty good season. But then he was sold a year later to Sampdoria. City lost $500,000. Now, part of the reason City had to sell was that they actually couldn't afford to keep him. They actually couldn't afford to do the deal in the first place. And it caused major problems behind the scenes for them. But you look at that Nottingham Forest team that won the European Cup. Peter Shilton, one of the great English goalkeepers. You've got Viv Anderson, an absolutely incredible defender. You've got Kenny Burns at centre-back, John McGovern in midfield, a wizard. Francis on the right wing, Ian Bowyer, John Robertson, one of the most talented Scottish players of all time. He provided the assist in this final. Gary Birtles and Tony Woodcock up front. Martin O'Neill on the bench. A very young Chris Woods who'd go on to have a good career on the bench. Archie Gemmell on the bench, very good player. It's a very, very talented squad that Clough had put together in short order. And in the following year, they won it again. This time they beat Hamburg at the Santiago Bernabeu. This time it's John Robertson with the goal. But when you look at that team that played in that final, there's no Trevor Francis. He's nowhere to be seen because he was injured. Viv Anderson is there. You've got Martin O'Neill playing out of position in midfield. McGovern is there. Robertson is there. Gary Birtles played up front on his own. That Hamburg team was star-studded. You've got Kevin Keegan. who'd left Liverpool and gone to Hamburg after winning the European Cup in 77, was the Ballon d'Or winner in 78 and 79. And here he is in 1980 looking for a second European Cup, a team that also included Felix Magath, tremendous defensive-minded midfielder, Peter Nogley. This was a really good team. Really, really good team. But it wasn't to be. Forest would do the magic. And having been in the second division as recently as 1977, they'd won the first division in 78, having been promoted from the second division in 77, and then win back-to-back European Cups. We'll never see something like that happen again. Like, just imagine, if you will, a guy taking over, let's just say Millwall, because they've been in the Championship for a long time. Let's just say someone took over Millwall now, and let's give them 2 years to get Millwall out of that division. How long had Clough been at Forest when he got them promoted is the big question, I suppose. So he took over in 75. Yeah, so 2 years. Took them over in 75. They got promoted into the top flight in 77. So 2 years. So let's say someone took over Millwall. Actually, what Championship club is change managers this year? That's probably the fairest way, rather than just picking Millwall. Championship. Right, and it has to be a club that's been in that division for a good while. Let's just say Hull. Let's say Tom Walter takes over Hull. They've been in the Championship for a few years now. And in 2 years, he gets them promoted to the top flight. So the 25-26 season ends with them being promoted into the Premier League. The 26-27 season ends with them winning the Premier League. And then in 27-28 and 28-29, he wins back-to-back European Cups. Just imagine how that manager would be viewed. Like, they would immediately be catapulted into the conversations for the greatest of all time. And that's what Brian Clough was, one of the greatest of all time. Like, he said a lot of unfortunate things. He may have been a slightly terrible set of lads. But you look at what he did as a manager. Took over a Derby County team in the second division, won it, and then went and won the first division 3 years later. And potentially would have won a European Cup, if not for some very questionable officiating. Then he has to take his lumps, takes over as Brighton. He doesn't like it down there, doesn't like the South Coast. Goes to Leeds. It's an unmitigated disaster. Goes to Brighton. It's actually 18 months from when he took over to when they got promoted. So one full season. But we'll give Tom Walter, or Tim Walter, 2 seasons to do it. And then we'll see where we stand. But gets them promoted, wins the top flight at the first attempt, bearing in mind going up against the Liverpool team that's winning back-to-back European Cups. So a very high standard. A very high standard of competition. And then wins 2 European Cups. But doesn't just win 2 European Cups. Also wins 2 League Cups back-to-back. Wins a League and League Cup double. And then a Champions League or a European Cup and League Cup double. Absolutely incredible. Genuinely an incredible feat. Anyway, we'll move on. 1981, it's Liverpool again, beating Real Madrid. The last time Real Madrid lost a European Cup final 27th of May, 1981, in Paris. Liverpool win 1-0. Alan Kennedy gets the only goal of the game. Liverpool still have a lot of the same faces. Phil Neal, Phil Thompson, Alan Hansen, Ray Kennedy, Kenny Dalglish, Terry McDermott, Graham Souness. They're all still there. Jimmy Case is now coming off the bench. You've got Sammy Lee, David Johnson, and Alan Kennedy, the goal scorer, who've come along. Ray Clements still in goal. 1982 then, the final of England's 6 in a row. Aston Villa beat Bayern Munich in Rotterdam. Peter White with the only goal of the game. That's a Bayern team with Paul Breitner and Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, Klaus Augenthaler. Villa in, I think, one of the stranger runs that any club has had. Like, just talked about what Forest did. It's important to put it into context of what Aston Villa did. So Aston Villa, who had obviously had a lot of success in their history, they win the league title in 1981. They win the European Cup in 82. They win the European Super Cup in 83. But by 1987, they're relegated. 5 years after winning the European Cup, they're relegated. So again, let's track back. Chelsea won a European Cup in 2001. Now imagine if in 2021, imagine if in 2026 they get relegated. I could use City, obviously, but there is a chance City gets relegated because they're under this investigation. There is a chance Chelsea get relegated as well because of their own financial misdeeds. Let's just say it will be the equivalent of Liverpool having won it in 2019 and getting relegated this year, like the season just finished. That's what Villa did. I don't know what's crazier, to go from where Forest were to where they got to, or to go from where Villa were to where they ended up. Is it harder to build from the second division to European champions in 4 years? Or is it harder to collapse from European champions to dead fucking last in the English league? Absolutely incredible that they could find themselves relegated 5 years after lifting the European Cup. Like, their fans had to be thinking the good times are coming back here. But absolutely not. Moving on then, 1983, English dominance comes to an end and Hamburg win the European Cup. At this point, Keegan has moved on. He's come back to England. Lars Barstrup has replaced him as the foreign star, but that team is still all about the likes of Felix Magath, Dietmar Jacobs, Manfred Kaltz, and Uli Steen in goal. Magath himself scores the only goal of the 83 final to beat Juventus in Athens. 1984 then, 40 years ago, Liverpool become the first team to win the European Cup on penalties. 1-1 draw with Roma in Rome, in their home stadium. Phil Neal scores. He is hereby winning his 4th European Cup, which nobody else outside of Real Madrid players had done to this point. His goal was cancelled out by Roberto Pruzzo, who scored just before half-time. The game went to penalties, and Liverpool won 4-2. Nickel missed, but Neal, Souness, Rush, and Alan Kennedy all scored. More change in the Liverpool team this time, quite drastic change. Bruce Grobbelaar in, Mark Lawrenson in. 2 fullbacks and Hansen are still there. Sammy Lee is still there. Craig Johnston is now there instead of Terry McDermott. Ronnie Whelan is in the team, and Ian Rush is in the team. can't help but notice there's 3 Irish players in that squad, along with 5 Scottish players, which is very impressive. 6 English players and 1 Welsh player, plus Bruce Grobbelaar from Zimbabwe. 1985 then is the tragic final at Heysel, which Juventus won 1-0 through a Michel Platini penalty, a game that should never have taken place. 1986 then, Steaua Bucharest win the European Cup on penalties. And again, you could never imagine. Now Steaua Bucharest aren't even allowed to call themselves Steaua Bucharest, but they beat Barcelona 2-0 on penalties. A 0-0 draw, and then a 2-0 win on penalties. 4 Barcelona players stepped up and missed. 4 of them. That's very difficult. The star name in that Steaua team is Miodrag Beladadici, the centre-back / sweeper. Tremendous player. In the Barca team, you've got Bernd Schuster, one of the great German midfielders. You've got Steve Archibald, Scottish forward. Very, very talented player. 1987, Porto beat Bayern Munich in Vienna. They went 1-0 down on 25 minutes through an opening goal by Ludwig Kogel. But in the 77th minute, Rabah Madjer scores, an Algerian international. And then Huari, the Brazilian striker, scored on 80 minutes to turn the game on its head. He'd come off the bench. And Bayern were down. And when you look at the star names, Jean-Marie Pfaff in goal, one of the great goalkeepers of all time, Belgian legend. Unusually in that Bayern team, you had an East German international, Norbert Natwe. You've got Hansi Flick playing on the right of a 3-man midfield. You've got Lothar Matthäus in that midfield, and Andreas Brehme, obviously best known as a left back, also in that midfield. And up front, you've got Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, Dieter Hoeneß, who's obviously part of the Hoeneß, what would you call them? The Hoeneß legacy at Bayern. He's the younger brother of Uli Hoeneß. He's the father, actually, of Sebastian Hoeneß, the manager at Stuttgart. It's a bit like Succession, really, the Hoeneß family in Bayern. But yeah, that super team, and it was a super team, unable to overcome Porto. 1988, PSV Eindhoven would beat Benfica on penalties. 0-0 draw. The game ends 6-5 on penalties. That PSV team, Hans-van Breukelen, Eric Goretz, Ronald Koeman was in that team. Wim Kieft was in that team. The Benfica team, Mats Magnussen is there. You've got Carlos Moser, really good centre-back. Chiquinho Carlos playing on the right side of midfield. Not star names, but a very good team. And PSV overcome them 1-0. Sorry, on 6-5 on penalties. That game took place in Stuttgart. And again, you'd have a tough time imagining a European Cup final now being held in Stuttgart, because now they're just held in capital cities and in national team arenas. But back then, Germany didn't really have a national. They still don't really have a national stadium. But if a European Cup final was to be played in Germany now, it's either going to be in Munich or in Berlin. It's not going to be anywhere else. Into 1989 and the birth of what I believe to be the greatest club side that's ever been. This is AC Milan beating Steaua Bucharest 4-0. That Steaua team had Dan Petrescu and Georgi Hagi among its ranks. That Milan team had the greatest defence of all time. Tassotti, Costacurta, Baresi, Maldini. In midfield, you had Colombo on the right, Rijkaard in the heart of it, next to Carlo Ancelotti, and Donadoni on the left. And up front, you've got Ruud Gullit and Marco van Basten. You got Giovanni Galli in goal. Good, but not great. But you've got pure greatness in defence, one incredible midfielder and three very good midfielders, and then pure greatness up front in Hullet and Van Basten. That's an incredible team. They would go back to back, winning it again the following year, beating Benfica. This time in Vienna. The previous final had been at the Camp Nou in Barcelona. And nothing has changed except Ivani comes in on the left wing because Donadoni was injured. Just a phenomenal group of players, though. And on the bench, you've got Daniele Massaro and Marco Simone, who would write their own history at AC Milan, but were young players at that point. Filippo Galli, who's maybe the best backup centre-back that's ever lived, was part of all of this. He'd been a backup in both finals. He was just, you get those players that they could be, like Gary Cahill's was kind of like this, but not of the same level. Like, they could play for a mid-table to, Europa League level side and be really, really good, like tremendously good for them. But you'd watch them and think, you're just not quite good enough to start every single week for a top-level club, but you'd be a great backup because you'll never give me less than 7 out of 10. You never give me more than 7 out of 10, but you're 7 out of 10 every single week, no matter what. That's what Filippo Galli was like. A 1-0 win with Frank Rijkaard scoring the only goal of the game, which means that with Hullet and Van Basten having scored 2 each the previous year, all three of the Dutch maestros got goals in European Cup finals for those Arrigo Sacchi teams. 1991, Red Star Belgrade versus Marseille. That's a Marseille team that included Basil Boli, had Chris Waddle, Jean-Pierre Papin, Abadai Pele, and on the bench, Dragan Stojkovic, who is one of the greatest Serbian players of all time, at the time one of the greatest Yugoslavian players, had been at Red Star, had left to go to Marseille primarily for the cash, and missed out on the greatest moment in the history of Serbian football. That team, like Belo Dedici, who I mentioned from the Stoja Bucharest win, he's there at centre-back. You've got Vladimir Jugovic, Robert Prozinecki, Sinisa Mihailovic, Darko Panchev, Dejan Savicevic. That is just a star-studded team. The talent that came out of what we then knew as Yugoslavia, what we now know as Serbia, Montenegro, wherever else, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Slovenia, all of those countries, when they were amalgamated, the talent that they were producing in the late 80s and the early 90s, absolutely frightening. Just this incredible era of players that appeared. If you go back and watch the 1990 World Cup and you look at the Yugoslav squad in that World Cup, this is the last time Yugoslavia played at an international tournament because they were thrown out of the 92 Euros because of the war breaking out there. And that obviously led to Denmark, who hadn't qualified, been put in and going on to win it. But go and look at that squad. Like, there's just so much talent in that Yugoslav squad. It is crazy. Davor Josic is there. Safet Susic is there. Panchev is there. Stojkovic is there. Vujovic is there. Alan Boksic is there. Prozinecki, Robert Jarni, Dejan Savicevic, Davor Suker. Like, it is phenomenal how gifted that squad was. And to this day, the best individual midfield performance ever seen at a World Cup is Lothar Matthäus against them. Like, Vladimir Jukovic was one of the best midfielders of his generation. Could play anywhere, right side, left side, central, defensive, attacking, right back, could do a job at left back. Just fantastic. Injuries hurt him through his career. And he probably moved a little bit too often, but he was a phenomenally good player. He couldn't even get in that squad for the 90 World Cup. But they would win that final 5-3 on penalties after a very dull 0-0 draw. That's one of the more boring European Cup finals we've had. But Prosinecki, Binic, Beladici, Mihailovic, and Panchev all stepped up and scored. And Amoros had missed the first kick for Marseille, and then they were behind the 8 ball. So despite Cassoni, Papan, and Moser scoring, Carlos Moser had moved from Benfica, where he'd lost, to Marseille, where he would lose yet another European Cup final. They scored their penalties, but it wasn't enough. We move on to the 1992 European Cup final, which took place at Wembley. This was another pretty dull affair that had promised to be really exciting. Sampdoria against Barcelona. That Sampdoria team is just phenomenally talented. Gianluca Pagliuca in goals, Pietro Viekovod at centre-back. You've got Katenik at left-back. You've got Ivano Bonetti, who, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he end up playing for Grimsby? He did, yeah. Yeah, have a go at this for a career, okay? Brescia, Genoa, Juventus, Atalanta, Bologna, Sampdoria, part of the great Sampdoria team, where you win a league title, Bologna, Brescia, Torino, and then at the age of 31, having never ventured outside of your homeland, you end up playing at Grimsby Town, where you encounter a manager who can't control his temper and breaks your cheekbone. Then you move on and you play for Tranmere and Crystal Palace, and people assume you're washed, but you go back to Italy and you have 2 really good years for Genoa. What a mad odyssey for him, for 2 years of his life, to have ended up with Grimsby, then Tranmere. Whatever about Crystal Palace, but Grimsby and Tranmere. And what's amazing to me is that the manager in question is Brian Laws. He's the guy that broke Bonetti's cheekbone. I think he threw a plate at him. And it's amazing to me that he managed again. He managed Scunthorpe for 9 years, then Sheffield Wednesday, then Burnley, then Shamrock Rovers, and then Scunthorpe again. He should never have worked again after what he did. Anyway, did I mention Mancini and Vialli in that team? Attilio Lombardo played on the other wing, so you had Attilio Lombardo, who had no hair, on one wing, and then Bonetti with his flowing mullet on the other wing. That Barcelona team, that is maybe the best iteration of Johan Cruyff's team. You've got Zubizarreta in goal, Ronald Koeman as a sweeper behind Albert Ferrer and Nando. You've got Sacristan and Juan Carlos as wingbacks, a midfield 3 with Pep Guardiola sitting, Jose Maria Baquero kind of playmaking, and Michael Laudrup just being the best player in the world at this point. Up front, you had Hristo Stoichkov off Julio Salinas. On the bench, you've got Carlos Busquets, father of Sergio, Chiqui Begiristain, now the director of football at Manchester City, Miguel Angel Nadal, who was a great defender, played defensive midfield as well, who I believe is the uncle of Rafael Nadal, obviously the great tennis player, and then Jean-Antoni Goycochea, who probably could have done more. Like, he had a really good career, don't get me wrong. But he stayed at Barcelona probably a couple of years too long when it was maybe pretty obvious to some that Cruyff didn't want him there anymore. But he'd go on and do well for Athletic Bilbao. And then he went and played in Japan. And he was one of the... Lineker was the first, and then Laudrup went. But Goicoechea was one of them kind of in that first wave that went to Japan to play. And by all accounts was quite popular over there. But a very good player, very, very good player. That's a great team. Ronald Koeman scored the only goal of the game in the 112th minute, extra time after a fairly dull 90 minutes. 1993, Marseille win the European Cup, beating AC Milan. This is a similar but slightly different version of AC Milan. So Sebastiano Rossi is now in goal. The back four is still the back four. Donadoni has moved from the left wing to the right wing. Gianluigi Lentini has come into the team. This is pre-car accident. This is Lentini having just emerged as maybe the best young wide player in world football at Torino, been snapped up by Milan for a world record fee, having a pretty good season, and then having an absolute shocker in the final, leading to him kind of being down in the dumps and going a little bit off the rails that summer, which, I think probably contributed to the car crash, which then caused not only him to end up in a coma, but a lot of controversy as well, and a lot of ill feeling, because he had a female passenger in the car who happened to be the wife of Toto Schillaci, who had been the hero of Italian football at the 1990 World Cup. Wasn't the most forgiving of souls in terms of public statements. But anyway, yeah. So he was left wing. You had Albertini and Rijkaard in the middle of the park, and then you had Van Basten and Daniele Massaro up front. On the bench, you've got Carlo Cudicini, who'd obviously come to England and spend quite a long time playing for different English clubs, including Chelsea, most notably. Stefano Aranio, who would play for Derby County. Ivani is there on the bench as well, and Jean-Pierre Papin is on the bench. The Marseille team, Fabien Barthez is in goal. Jocelyn Anglima, Basil Bolli, Marcel Desailly, Frank Swazi, Alan Boksic, Rudy Vuller, Abade Pele, and Didier Deschamps, notably, captaining the team from central midfield. That game at the Olympiastadion in Munich was won with a Basil Bolli towering header in the 64th minute. And then the shit really hit the fan for Marseille after that. This was the last game in which Marco van Basten would play. He'd had the horrible ankle injury as a result of a tackle by Jurgen Kohler. And in this game, he picked up another ankle injury. And he tried to play through it and eventually had to be taken off on the 86th minute. And he fought for 2 years to try and get back on the pitch, but he never could. So we didn't know it at the time, but we witnessed the last game of, I believe, one of the greatest strikers of all time. I believe one of the top 2 or 3 strikers of all time. Certainly in my kind of 1970s to now qualifiers, unbelievably good. Unbelievably good. 1994 then, AC Milan were back, and they were back with a vengeance. They would walk into the Olympic Stadium in Athens and smack the shit out of Johan Cruyff's Barcelona dream team. This Johan Cruyff team had a couple of changes. So you had Albert Ferrer and Sergi playing as the fullbacks, with Koeman and Nadal as the centre-backs. In midfield, you've got Guardiola and Baquero still there. Guillermo Amor had come in to replace Laudrup, who had left to go to Real Madrid, because you could only have 3 foreigners, and Barca signed Romario, which meant that Koeman was going to play at centre-back. It meant that Stoichkov, Romario and Laudrup were going to have to rotate. Laudrup didn't want any part of that, so he left and went to Real. So in the attack, you've got Stoichkov, you've got Romario, and you've got Chiki Begiristain playing left side. The Milan team, it's still Rossi's back in goal. Tassotti. Now, this is where it gets weird, because remember, that's Barcelona's dream team. They're heavy favourites. They're expected to walk in here and murk this Milan team, primarily because no Costa Curta, no Baresi, Rijkaard is gone, Hullet is gone, and Van Basten is, we don't know it yet, but he's done. So you've got Galli starting at centre-back next to Paolo Maldini, who's moving positions, and a young Christian Panucci, who's a right-back, is drafted in to play left-back. In midfield, you've got the incredible Zvonimir Boban, Albertini and Desailly, which I still to this day think is one of the best pairings we've ever seen. And then Donadoni's back playing left side where he played in the 89 final. You've got Savicevic with Massaro up front. Lentini is on the bench with Marco Simone. But they're not expected to win. But on 22 minutes, Massaro scores. Just before half-time, Massaro scores again. Just after half-time, 2 minutes after half-time, Savicevic scores that outrageous lob from such an awkward position to get his body and whip the ball the way he did. It's one of the best European Cup final goals you'll ever see. And then Marcel Desailly wrapped it up on 58 minutes because Barca had thrown caution to the wind and were piling forward, and he was just able to run through everybody and score the winner. In 1995, Milan would be back to the final, but they would lose this time to Ajax. Patrick Kluivert scoring the only goal of the game in the 85th minute. That is Louis van Gaal's team. Van der Sar, Reitziger, Blind and Rijkaard, De Boer at left back, Seedorf, Davids, and Litmanen as sort of a weird midfield three, with Finidi George right wing, the other De Boer, Ronald, as the 9, false 9, and Mark Overmars on the left. And that is one of the most flexible teams you'll ever see. If you can find good footage of those teams, go and watch it there. They were brilliant. And their run in Europe that year was sensational. It's a shame that the Milan era, dynasty, the Honus dynasty was what I was trying to think of. The Milan era came to an end on a European Cup final defeat. Like, bear in mind, Maldini won 5 European Cups. They could have won this final. Now, Ajax were probably were the better team across the year, but Milan could have won this one. They should have won the one against Marseille, and they should have beaten Liverpool in 2005. Now, on the flip side, Liverpool should have beat them in 2007. But he could easily have ended up with 8 European Cups, which is just bananas to think about. But yeah, that's the one time I think that I remember that Capello team where I thought they're not the better team on the pitch here. It's probably the one time during that Capello run. And I've watched, not every game obviously because he was there quite a while, but I've watched a lot of those games. And I remember a lot of those games from when they were on at the time. And they were one of the teams that was regularly on the, when Football Italia was on Channel 4. That Milan team were on regularly, and you just always expected them to win. But I remember that Ajax game, I didn't think they were going to win. Ajax had been better in the tournament. They'd met, obviously, in the group stage. Ajax had won both games. And yeah, Ajax were just flat out better than them. But the way the final played out, Milan had chances to win it. 96, Ajax are back again, but this time they lose 4-2 on penalties. Ravanelli puts Juventus 1-up on 13 minutes. This game took place in Rome. Jari Litmanen equalised just before half-time. Fairly cagey second half. But in the penalty shootout, Juventus would win 4-2. Their first European Cup since 85. Their last European Cup. You've got Angelo Peruzzi, Ciro Ferrara. You've got Paulo Sousa, Didier Deschamps, Antonio Conte. And that front three, Vialli is the 9, Del Piero left side, Ravanelli right side. Really, really impressive. Coming off the bench to win his second European Cup, Vladimir Jukovic, who I mentioned earlier. So we're in a weird pattern here. So Milan win the European Cup in 94, lose the final in 95. Ajax win it in 95, lose the final in 96. Juventus win it in 96, and then lose the final here in 97 to a Borussia Dortmund team managed by Ottmar Hitzfeld, which is one of my favourite teams of all time. It includes Matthias Sammer, Jürgen Koller, Stefan Reuter, Paulo Sousa winning back-to-back European Cups with different teams. First player to do that, I believe. Andreas Muller, Karl-Heinz Riedle, Stefan Chapuisat, and for some reason, Paul Lambert. But that team was absolutely incredible. Even the lads I just didn't mention there. Stefan Klose, really good goalkeeper. Martin Kree, really good centre-back. And Jörg Heinrich, outstanding left-back. Absolutely outstanding. 3-1 win for Dortmund. Karl-Heinz Riedle scored twice in the first half. Del Piero pulled one back. Lars Ricken came off the bench and lobbed Peruzzi from 40 yards with his first touch. And Dortmund had the short trip from Munich back to Dortmund. Didn't have to get in any international flights or anything. So that was nice and handy to bring their trophy home. 1998, Juve are back again. And they're losing again. They lost 1-0 to AC Milan. Predrag Mijatovic scoring the only goal at the Amsterdam Arena. I have such vivid memories of this game. This was a great Madrid team. So, growing up in the 80s and 90s, you saw bits and pieces of Spanish football, and then it started to become a bit more prevalent around the mid-90s, where the games would be on a bit more. And you kept hearing that, Real Madrid, all this history in the European Cup, but they hadn't won it now since the 60s, and there was all this pressure. And Capello had gone to Madrid the year before this for the 96-97 season. At the same time, Bobby Robson had gone to Barcelona, and Bobby Robson had bought Ronaldo, or 9, and they'd won the Copa del Rey and the European Cup Winners' Cup. And they'd spent quite a bit of money and they'd rebuilt the team, but Ronaldo got all the attention, obviously. But very quietly, Capello had gone to Real and he'd built an even better team that won the league. Bodo Illgner in goal, Christian Panucci at right back, Roberto Carlos at left back, Manolo Sanchis and Fernando Hierro, 2 of the 3 best Spanish centre-backs of all time, playing here. Fernando Redondo sitting in front of them, I believe the greatest defensive midfielder of all time. Christian Karambou, an absolute box-to-box monster, and Clarence Seedorf, who could be a box-to-box monster when he wanted to be, but was also a technically gifted genius. Raul as a 10. Fernando Morientes and Predrag Mijatovic as the front 2. Now, the previous season when they were winning the league, it had been Mijatovic and Davor Suker, who were just brilliant together. That's one of my favourite teams as well, that Real team. Absolutely love them. Tremendous stuff. That Juventus team included Edgar Davids, who'd obviously been at Ajax, and Zinedine Zidane. They had remade themselves after winning the European Cup. Vialli left and went to Chelsea. Ravanelli was sold to Middlesbrough and had a big tantrum about it, or a very public tantrum about it. 1999 is the very famous Manchester United treble season. at the Camp Nou. Everybody knows the story. They go 1-0 down to the Mario Basler free kick. The game is over. The trophy is getting prepared. Bayern Munich are going to end the hunt for the treble. But in the 91st minute, there's a Beckham corner. It's half cleared. There's a swinger from Giggs, and Sheringham deflects it in, or did it on purpose, so not a deflection, but redirects it into the back of the net. And then on 93 minutes, it's another Beckham corner. Sheringham goes front post, gets the flick on, and Solskjaer, great instincts, gets his foot on the end of it and puts it into the roof of the net. It's one of the strangest games I've ever seen. And I recently watched the 99 documentary on Amazon. I do highly recommend watching it. But Ferguson got absolutely everything wrong for that game, everything, and was throwing shit at a wall. Ottmar Hitzfeld coached a perfect game until his players got tired. That's basically what happened. Bayern were brilliant. And Bayern should have been 3-0 up. Like, everybody knows the goal. Most people forget that Karsten Janker hit the crossbar with an overhead, and Mehmet Scholl hit the crossbar or the post with a chip that gave Schmeichel no chance. That game should have been over. United were dead and buried. And Bayern didn't take the chances. And United came back, and fair play to them. Anyway, that's one of the more famous European Cups, obviously, for how it ended and obviously what it meant. 2000, Real Madrid win again. They beat Valencia. A couple of notable changes. You've got a completely different defensive line. You've got Iker Casillas now in goal. Ivan Helguera, Aitor Karanka, and Ivan Campo as a back three. Hierro would come off the bench, as would Manolo. Salgado is the right wing back. Carlos is still there. Steve McManaman is in midfield with Redondo, and Raul is playing as the 10, and Morientes this time is partnered by Nicolas Anelka. Karambu is on the bench. Ilgner's on the bench. Savio, he'd been on the bench the previous one. But Seedorf is the most notable one who's gone. Mijatovic, obviously, as well, because he'd scored the goal to beat Juventus. But Seedorf leaving was a big surprise because of his age. Like, it was just assumed he would stay. But I love this Valencia team. You've got Canizares in goal. You've got Anglama, who was at Marseille when they won theirs. Maurizio Pellegrino is in defence. Gerardo's at left back. Farinos and Gerrard in midfield with Gaisca Mendieta and Kili Gonzalez. Such a strong diamond midfield. They were all brilliant together. They never quite worked out apart. They were never quite the same. And Claudio Lopez up front. Yeah, Joachim Bjorklund on the bench along with Adrian Illy. Some really good players. Really, really good players in that Valencia team. But it mattered not. And they lost. In 2001, they would lose again. And they had to rebuild part of that midfield because Gerrard and Farinos both left. They were replaced by Ruben Baraja and Pablo Aimar. So the midfield actually got better. Roberto Ayala also came in. Amadeo Carboni also came in. And up front, you had John Carew. It's a really good team. Took Bayern to penalties. Mendieta opened the scoring 3 minutes. Penalty scores. Effenberg equalises on 50 minutes from the penalty spot. And we got quite a dramatic penalty shootout. It ended 5-4, but both sides took 7 penalties. Unfortunately for Valencia, they missed 3 of theirs, including Zlatko Zahovic, who was a favourite of mine. Didier Deschamps was on their bench. He was past his best at that point. Fabio Aurelio was on the bench. Vicente was on the bench, obviously a really good left winger. That was a superbly talented Valencia team. Obviously, Rafa Benitez would come in when Cooper stepped aside and would win multiple league titles and a UEFA Cup. But just to look at that Bayern team, which had changed quite drastically from the team that lost to United, Oliver Kahn is still there, Samuel Kuffer is still there, but Patrick Anderson is in, Thomas Linke is there, Willie Sagnol, Bisante Lizarazu, Owen Hargreaves in midfield with Stefan Effenberg. Mehmet Scholl, who'd come off the bench against United, he's starting, as is Hassan Salihamidzic, and Giovanni Elber is playing up front, and Cyriaco Sforza, who I've mentioned before, was on the bench along with Michael Tarnat, who's a decent left-back, Yanker, Alex Ziegler, and Roque Santa Cruz, a young Roque Santa Cruz. We might as well keep going for a while more. 2002, Hamden Park, Bayer Leverkusen. Unfortunately, having lost the Dutch Cup final, thrown away the league, get beaten 2-1 by Real Madrid. Raul scores on 8 minutes, Lucio equalises on 14, and Zinedine Zidane scores maybe the best goal in European Cup final history, that left-footed volley. Cesar starts in goal, has to be taken off due to injury. Iker Casillas comes off the bench to win his second European Cup. Salgado is there, Hierro's there, Roberto Carlos, Claude Makelele, Luis Figo, Santiago Solari, Zinedine Zidane, Raul, and Morientes. Steve McManaman on the bench. He came on for Figo. Guti is on the bench. Karanka is on the bench. It's a really good team. That Leverkusen team, I mean, the star of the show is Michael Ballack, but Dimitar Berbatov was there and played 60-odd minutes of the game because he came on when Berdaric got injured. Bernd Schneider was in that team. Lucio, they obviously scored the goal. Diego Placente, the Argentine left-back, was also very good. Right, 2003. This was a boring final. This was at Old Trafford. Again, don't think we'll see a final played there again, though Jim Ratcliffe certainly wants one. Juventus 0, Milan 0. Milan win 3-2 on penalties. Pavel Nedved was the best player in the world that year. He was suspended for the final, and that kind of killed Juventus' attacking impetus because they leaned so heavily into just him being the carrying force. Del Piero and Trezeguet were up front. Davids was in midfield. You had Lilian Thuram at right back, Chiro Ferreira, Paulo Montero as part of that defence, Buffon in goal. The Milan team, Costa Curta played right back in that game. Nesta and Maldini played centre back, and Kaladze played at left back. Injuries forced their hand in terms of what they could put out there. You did have the Gattuso, Pirlo, and Seedorf trio, but it was with Rui Costa as the 10. Obviously, Kaká would replace him in time to come. Shevchenko and Filippo Inzaghi up front. 3-2 win on penalties. Seedorf and Kaladze missed. Serginho, Nesta, and Shevchenko scored. Trezeguet, Zalieta, and Montero all missed for Juve. Birondelli and Del Piero did score. 2004, it is the birth of the special one. Jose Mourinho's Porto beating Monaco 3-0 in Gelsenkirchen, that is Schalke. Carlos Alberto, Deco, and Alinichev with the goals. That Porto team obviously has one Ricardo Carvalho, Paulo Ferreira, Vitor Bahia, Jorge Costa George Costa, really good old centre-back, Costinha, Maniche. It's a really good team. And just to mention some of the players in that Monaco team, Patrice Evra, seeing him cry filled me with joy. Lucas Bernardi is there. Ludovic Gulli, really good French midfielder who would go on to Barcelona. He was their best player. He got injured early and had to go off. Jerome Rotten, who's a brilliantly talented winger who never really figured out the balance between being a professional and having money, and was a bit too much of a party animal. Fernando Morientes was in that team. Sebastian Squillaci, who ended up at Arsenal and was terrible, was on the bench. as was Emmanuel Adebayor, a young Emmanuel Adebayor, obviously. 2005 is Istanbul. It is Liverpool coming from 3-0 down to beat AC Milan on penalties. In that first half, Maldini scores in the first minute, then Crespo gets 2. And then it's that 6 crazy minutes. It's Gerrard, it's Schmeitzer, it's Alonso. We go to penalties after the Dudek save from Shevchenko. Hamann, Cisse, and Schmeitzer score. So even though John Arne Riise misses, I still don't understand why he didn't just walk up and leather it. Liverpool win 3-2 because Serginho, Pirlo, and Shevchenko all missed. It's believed Steven Gerrard was on the last Liverpool penalty. And at that point in his career, that could have gone absolutely anywhere. 2006, Barcelona beat Arsenal 2-1. Jens Lehmann sent off on 18 minutes at the Stade de France. That changes the entire game. The entire game. Robert Pires has to go off. And Arsenal just don't carry the same threat. I don't understand to this day why he didn't take Lundberg off to bring Almunia on, but, such is the way it goes. Notable names, obviously, I've mentioned Pires, Campbell, Sol Campbell, Ashley Cole, Gilberto Silva, Cesc Fabregas, Hleb, Lundberg, and Henry. It's a really good team. Obviously, Vieira had left the previous summer. The Barcelona team had Rafa Marquez and Carlos Puyol at centre-back. That's a pairing and a half. Giovan Bronckhorst at left-back. Deco is there now. Gulli is there now. Finally gets his European Cup, having missed out on one the year before. Ronaldinho is sensational, and Samuel Eto'o is just a machine. Iniesta, Xavi, and Henrik Larsson all on the bench. Xavi never came off the bench. Iniesta did at half-time. Came off for Edmilson. But Arsenal, despite going 1-0 down, despite going down to 10 men, actually scored first through Sol Campbell on 37 minutes, but then Eto'o on 76 and Belletti, who came off the bench on 80. I think he played for Chelsea, didn't he, Belletti, at one point? 2 goals in 4 minutes. The Arsenal just ran out of steam. They just ran out of steam. They didn't have enough legs. And unfortunately, they brought on Flamini for Cesc. And the idea was to shut things down, and it didn't shut things down at all. 07, then it is Liverpool against Milan again. This time Milan win in Athens. Pipo Inzaghi with 2. Dirk Kuyt got a late consolation for Liverpool, was all it really was. I will never not believe that one of those goals was offside. So I don't care what the replay says. I don't care what the replay says. 2008, Manchester United are back and they beat Chelsea on penalties. John Terry beginning his CV of Champions League embarrassment by slipping and blowing the European Cup. Cristiano Ronaldo had put United 1 up on 26. Frank Lampard equalised on half-time. Game ends 1-1. We're in Moscow, of all places, for this final. Tevez scores, Ballack scores, Carrick scores, Belletti scores, Cristiano misses, Lampard scores, Hargreaves scores, Ashley Cole scores, Nani scores, John Terry steps up. There was no earthly reason for John Terry taking the 5th penalty. None at all. Nobody has ever explained why John Terry was taking that penalty. You can only assume that he pressured Avram Grant to letting him take the 5th one, so he'd have all the celebrations and all the pictures and the joy for himself, all the spotlight, because that's who John Terry is. And he slipped and missed, and I couldn't be happier for him. Anderson scored, Kalu scored, Giggs scored, and then Anelka missed. That Chelsea team, though, some serious talent in it. Petacek in goal, Essien at right back, obviously playing in a position. Carvalho, Terry, Cole, Makelele, Ashley Cole losing his 2nd European Cup final in 3 years. Makelele, Ballack, Lampard, Cole, Malouda, Drogba, who was actually sent off in that final, which I'd forgotten. On their bench, they had Shevchenko, who they didn't bring on, and Nicholas Anelka. The United team, That was a really strong team. Playing a 4-3-3, Van der Sar in goal, Wes Brown at right back, Gary Neville missed all of that season with an ankle injury. Ferdinand and Vidic, Everett left back, Hargreaves, Carrick and Scholes in midfield, Cristiano on the left, Tevez to the right, Rooney is the 9. They could switch in and out of a 4-4-2 and a 4-3-3 seamlessly. And they were very, very good, to be fair to them. They also won the league that year. In 2009, Barcelona, the birth of Pep Guardiola as a manager, just absolutely embarrassed United in this one. A 2-0 win. Lionel Messi scoring the headed goal over Rio Ferdinand. Samuel Eto'o had opened the scoring, but it's the headed goal that's the joy of it all. That was in the Olympic Stadium in Rome. And obviously at this point, you've got the Busquets, Xavi, Iniesta midfield. You've got the Messi, Henry, Eto'o front three. Carlos Puyol plays right wing and marks Cristiano Ronaldo out of a Champions League final. Hilarious stuff. 2010, Inter Milan, Jose Mourinho wins his second, beating Bayern Munich 2-0 at the Santiago Bernabeu. Diego Milito with the 2 goals. 2 really good teams, but couldn't be happier for that Inter team because you've got Walter Samuel, you've got Javier Zanetti, and you've got Esteban Cambiasso all in that group. Strong argument made that for 6 months there, Wesley Sneijder was the best player on the planet. But Mourinho got the best out of all of them. Dejan Stankovic came off the bench and was really good when he came on. The Bayern team, I mean, Lahm is there, Schweinsteiger's there, Robben, Muller. But I mean, Daniel Van Buiten and Martin de Michelis as your centre-backs is a bit mad. Holger Bachstuber, who was on course to become one of the great centre-backs until his knees just exploded. He played left back in that game. 2011, we are at Wembley. It's Barcelona beating Manchester United 3-1. Pedro scores, Rooney scores. United come out for the second half very confident. Messi scores and David Villa scores, and they barely touch the football. So, yeah, misplaced confidence. 2012, Chelsea win their first European Cup. One of the biggest upsets of all time because this Chelsea team was mediocre at best. Czech, Basingwa, David Luiz, Gary Cahill, Ashley Cole, obviously, John Obi Mikel, Frank Lampard, Solomon Kalou, Juan Mata, Ryan Bertrand, and Didier Drogba. Against a Bayern team with Manuel Neuer, Philipp Lahm, Jerome Boateng, Bastian Schweinsteiger, Toni Kroos, Arjen Robben, Thomas Muller, Frank Ribery. That's a slightly better team than they had a couple of years before, isn't it? They went 1-0 up in the 83rd minute. The game was in their home ground in Munich. And Didier Drogba equalised with 2 minutes left after Bayern just didn't defend a corner properly. Then they got the boost of Juan Mata missing the first Chelsea penalty. So Lahm scored, Mata missed. Mario Gomez scores, David Luiz scores. Neuer takes the third one, which is mental. Lampard scores. And then Ivica Olic steps up and he misses. Ashley Cole scores. Schweinsteiger steps up and he pricks around with the penalty spot and you knew he was nervous and he missed. And Didier Drogba scored and Chelsea won the European Cup. Bayern would win it the following year, though. They would beat Borussia Dortmund. Again at Wembley. A 2-1 win. Most people remember the Arjen Robben last-minute winner, but Mandzukic had opened the scoring. Gundogan had equalised in the penalty spot, and then Robben scored late on. That's obviously the Jurgen Klopp Dortmund team. Subotic and Hummels in centre-back, Bender and Gundogan in midfield, Royce playing as a 10 because Götze had gotten injured. But Klopp made a mistake. He went with Kuba, who's fine. Kuba on one wing is fine, but you've got to have creativity and goals on the other wing because all he's given you is graft. And for some reason, he picked Kevin Grauschwitz, who was mediocre at best, but Klopp loves a bit of dross, picked him left wing, got absolutely nothing from him in the game. And Lewandowski and Royce were up against the Bayern defence all by themselves. Bayern had Lam, Boateng, Dante, David Alaba, Javi Martinez, Bastian Schweinsteiger, Robin, Muller, Ribery, which is one of the great threes ever seen in a 4-2-3-1. Maybe the best three ever seen in a 4-2-3-1. And Mario Mandzukic up front. Unusually, in a game of that ilk, we didn't see a substitution until the 90th minute after Robin scored. It was almost like both managers were daring each other to make a sub, and neither would. And then Robin scores. Klopp blinks first, takes Kuba off, brings on Julian Scheiber for some reason. I think that might have been all he had to throw on. Jupp Heynckes replies by taking off Frank Ribery and bringing on Luis Gustavo. Klopp then brings off Sven Bender and brings on Yuri Sahin. And the final sub was Mandzukic off and Mario Gomez coming on. 2014, Real Madrid beat Atletico 4-1 after extra time. This is the other time Atleti were seconds away from winning a European Cup. Diego Godin had scored in the 36th minute. They'd held out and held out and held out. And then Sergio Ramos scored in the 93rd minute. And then Gareth Bale, Marcelo, and a late Cristiano penalty where he tried to make it all about himself, even though it was the fourth goal in a 4-1 win. Gave Real the European Cup and frankly broke my heart because that is the best coaching job I've ever seen anyone do. Simeone that season, they win La Liga, they get to the final, they should have won that final. If they just had one more piece to bring off the bench for a bit of depth to ease their woes. That's 2014. I'm sure you can all remember the last 10 years. Barcelona beat Juventus 3-1. That's the Neymar, Messi, Suarez group. Real beat Atleti on penalties in 16 after a 1-1 draw. That starts the three in a row. They beat Juventus 4-1. They beat Liverpool 3-1. Then Liverpool beat Tottenham 2-0. Then Bayern beat Paris Saint-Germain 1-0. Then Chelsea beat Man City 1-0. Then Real beat Liverpool 1-0. And then Manchester City beat Inter Milan 1-0. So it would be nice if we got 2 goals in this final. It would be nice if both teams scored in this final, which hasn't happened since 2018, which is the year before we last got 2 goals. So it would be nice if we got multiple goals in this game, and we'll talk briefly about it after the break, because I have been talking for a long time now. So I'll see you after this. Right, welcome back. So, European Cup final is tomorrow. It is an 8 p.m. UK kickoff. That's 9 p.m. Central Europe, I think. 3 p.m. East Coast time in the US, which I think is noon West Coast in the US. The game is at Wembley. It is expected to draw a pretty full house. In terms of team news, Real will be without Tchouaméni. So I would expect that Eduardo Camavinga comes into the midfield with Fede Valverde and Toni Kroos. Luka Modric off the bench at some point. I think we'll see Bellingham with Rodrigo and Vinicius as the front two. The big question for Carlo Ancelotti, outside of who comes in for Tchouaméni, which is an obvious one because it has to be Camavinga really, is who starts in goal. Thibaut Courtois obviously missed the vast majority of the season with a torn ACL and then a second knee injury. I think a meniscus injury. He played 4 games this season. He has not played in the European Cup. Whereas Lunin has played all season. Now, admittedly, he had to first break into the team because Kepa was brought in on loan when Courtois got hurt. Kepa didn't perform particularly well. Lunin took his spot, and Lunin has been brilliant. He has been absolutely brilliant. He's played the last 8 European games, 31 appearances in all competitions. If he doesn't start, I think he'll probably choose to leave in the summer, and there will be clubs lining up to sign him. My guess is that it will be Courtois that starts. I just think Carlo will go with the guy who's the better goalkeeper. So Courtois, Carvajal, Rudiger and Nacho, Mendy at left back, Valverde, Cruz, Camavinga, Bellingham, Vinny, and Rodrigo for Real. In terms of Dortmund, they're obviously huge underdogs coming in. Real are trying to win their 15th. They're just trying to win their 2nd. They're not looking to upset anybody, but they'd like to win their 2nd European Cup. Sebastian Haller is out. Rami Bensebaini is out. Now, I don't know that either of them would have started either way. Haller might have been involved, but I don't think he would have started over Füllkrug. And I don't think Bensebaini would come into the team at left back because Ian Maatsen has been so good. So I'm guessing Gregor Kobel starts in goal, Ryerson at right back, Hummels and Schlotterbeck at centre back, Maatsen on the left, Sabitzer and Chan, Sancho, Brand, Adeyemi, and Füllkrug up front. That's what I'm guessing the Borussia Dortmund team will be. I think Real Madrid are going to win. I just think they're the better team. But I'd love to see Dortmund win. I really would love to see Dortmund win. I'd love to see Emre Can lift that trophy. I'd love to see Mats Hummels get his hands on that trophy. I'm a big fan of Kobel. I think Maatsen's outstanding. I'm a big fan of Sancho. And I love that club. And I'd love to see them win. But I just don't see Real losing. They haven't lost a European Cup final in 43 years. And this is their 9th one since then. They're zombies in this competition. They just can't be killed. I'm going to pick Real to win 2-1. And I'm going to go quickly to another break and then come back and do the gossip. So I'll see you in a sec. Right, welcome back. So, Barrow have announced that Stephen Clements will be their new manager on a 2-year contract. They parted ways with Pete Wild at the end of this past season. Clements is a bit of a gamble, I think. He had worked with Hull's academy teams for a long time, went to Gillingham in 2023, oversaw 34 games, only won 12 of them and got sacked. Obviously, he was a decent player in his day, but he hasn't shown much yet as a manager. So we'll see how this goes. Best of luck to him. I do hope it goes well, but it's a bit of a gamble for Barrow. Wayne Rooney has been appointed as the new manager of Plymouth Argyle. I don't know. I don't know. He was dreadful at Birmingham. He was dreadful at DC United. He did okay at Derby in the circumstances. In the circumstances, he did okay. But there's nothing yet to show that he's a good manager. But Plymouth are taking a gamble. He's obviously a big name. Their hope will be, I think, that he can attract a higher caliber of player and maybe use some of his connections to get them some good loans. Obviously, this past season, they were back in the Championship, having been promoted from League One the year before. They just about survived, finished 1 point clear of Birmingham, and had it not been for Wayne Rooney going to Birmingham, they probably would have been relegated. So big challenge ahead from. Big challenge ahead from. Let's see how he does. Let's see how long he lasts there. I hope he does well. I really do. If you haven't actually watched the overlap interview between Gary Neville and him, which only came out recently, do make sure to watch it. It is quite good and really comes across personable. He comes across a likable fella. He's just a normal guy in a lot of ways. The house, by the way, is incredible. But I mean, you're looking at a guy with 153 games under his belt, 40 wins, 40 draws, and 73 defeats, 26.1% win rate. That was 85 games at Derby, 24 wins, 22 draws, and 39 defeats, 28.2% win rate. 53 games at DC United, 14 wins, 14 draws, 25 defeats, a 26.4% win rate, and 15 games at Birmingham, 2 wins, 4 draws, and 9 defeats for 13.3% win rate. It's not quite big dunk. It's not big dunk, but it's not great either, is it? And it must be the Everton in them. It really must be the Everton in them. And amazingly, on the topic of Big Dunk says he's staying. And Inverness Caledonian Thistle have made the decision to keep him. He just got them relegated. That's back-to-back relegations for Big Dunk, just in case you'd forgotten. And yet they've decided to keep him, despite no evidence that he's any good and lots of evidence that he's an actually terrible manager. Gerard Piqué has been placed under official investigation by a court in Spain over his alleged involvement in a deal which saw the Spanish Super Cup moved to Saudi Arabia. Piqué's company Cosmos signed agreements with the Spanish Football Federation that would see it receive £34 million for brokering the deal, with the Spanish Football Federation receiving £340 million. Judge Delia Rodrigo said there are possible illegalities with criminal implications. Piqué has now formally been included among a group of people under official investigation, and he has said that there has been no wrongdoing. So we'll see what happens out of that one, but that doesn't sound good. Piqué's life has taken a bit of a drastic veer, hasn't it, in the last couple of years? Artificial pitches are to be banned from the Scottish Premiership from the beginning of 2026-27. All 12 clubs voted on this, and all 12 clubs voted to remove them. So last season, Livingston and Kilmarnock had artificial pitches. Kilmarnock already had plans to change to a grass surface in 2025. Livingston were relegated. Hamilton Academical, who won promotion to the Championship, are the only other club to have used an artificial pitch in the top flight in recent years, from 2014 to 2021. So assuming they have one, they will have to look at changing it if they have ambitions of getting back into the Premiership. I mentioned Tim Walter earlier on. He is the former Hamburg boss who has now been appointed the new manager of Hull. And I've set him the challenge, obviously, of this season to just find his feet, next season to get promotion, the following season to win the Premier League, and the following 2 seasons to win the League Cup. And I also want to win the European Cup, and I also want 2 League Cups mixed in there as well. He's decent. Like, he did a pretty good job during a short spell at Stuttgart. He did a decent job at Hamburg, though not enough to get them promoted. He's decent. That's about all I can say. We'll see how he goes. I still think they made a mistake in sacking Lemur Senior. Mohamed Kamara of Monaco has been suspended for 4 matches after covering up anti-homophobia messages on his shirt. He placed white tape over the campaign logo during their 4-0 win over Nantes. Now, I understand that his religious beliefs have to factor in here, but at the same time, I don't disagree with the ban. I know a lot of people might, but I just don't. FIFA have been warned that players could go on strike. The Professional Footballers Association chief executive Mahita Malongo believes players are now at breaking point. Yeah, and we've got this nonsensical World Club Cup crap to come as well. Jude Bellingham is 20 years of age. And he has played already 18,486 minutes in his career. At the same age, David Beckham had played 3,929 and Frank Lampard had played 6,987. That's outrageous. And the Euros is still to come. She's going to get a bunch more minutes there as well. And his birthday's during the Euros, isn't it? Jude Bellingham. Yeah, birthday's the 29th of June. And he's, in all likelihood, he'll play the final. That could be just club minutes. That might not include international minutes. He just has. He's played far too much football. For a 20-year-old, he played 44 games in 1920, then 46, then 44 and 42 in his 3 seasons with Dortmund. This will be game number 42 for Real. And the next time he plays for England will be cap number 30 at 20 years of age. That's obscene. Yeah, I do think players are going to start pushing back. On to the gossip then. Manchester United are considering a move for Trevoh Chalobah. That's an interesting one. Luis Diaz and Joe Gomez are both targets for the Saudi Pro League. I think Diaz could well go there. Tottenham will consider offers for Richarlison and Emerson Royal. Richarlison's 27. You forget how long he's been in England. Benjamin Sesko favours a move to Arsenal this year. It's John Cross. He's always wrong about everything, and there's no way he has any insight into what Benjamin Sesko wants. But I do think there's a good chance that Arsenal get Sesko. Chelsea will appoint Enzo Maresca on a 5-year contract with an option for a further year. That's just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Chelsea's Albanian forward Armando Broja is wanted by Wolves, Crystal Palace and Everton. That's according to Danger Ben Jacobs, who's an enormous spoofer. Everton have told Manchester United to forget about signing Jarrett Brantwaite on the cheap. They want twice the 40 million United had hoped to sign him for. There's something about Mason Greenwood that I don't care about. West Ham are in talks with Palmeiras to sign 18-year-old Brazilian Luis Guilherme. Very, very talented, but kid, he's very raw. He's not ready to start for Palmeiras right now. He does start some games, but he doesn't start every game for Palmeiras. And that, to me, is like, he can't be starting in the Premier League. If you missed it last night, actually, Palmeiras drew 0-0 with San Lorenzo. Estevao, who's going to Chelsea, and Endrick, who's going to Real, they both started. Luis Guilherme did not. And what else took place? Independiente beat Liverpool 2-1. Lautaro Diaz with both goals. River Plate beat Deportivo 2-0. Miguel Borja with both goals. And Libertad beat Nacional 2-1. Oscar Cardosa. That's hardly Oscar Cardosa that was at. Is Oscar Cardosa? It would be. It's his country. Paraguay. It is. He's 41 and still playing and banging them in. I thought he retired 2 years ago. He went to Libertad in Paraguay at 34 years of age to finish out his career. And he's still playing 7 years later. He's still an international as well. I don't know how regularly he plays. He actually didn't get picked for a couple of years, but he's been back in the national team as recently as 2023. Fair play to him. Like, he scores regularly. I know it's the Paraguayan league, so it's not a great standard, but fair play to him. I like to see that. Arsenal are preparing to enter the race to sign Hartman from Feyenoord. Now, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he just tear his ACL for the second time? Yeah, he's not expected back until like January. And I think that might be being a little bit ambitious. Yeah, he tore his ACL in 2021, and now he's torn it again in March to January 8. And maybe he's back by then. That'd be a huge red flag, though. Player with 2 ACL tears at 22 years of age. Not for me. I should have pointed out that what that means in terms of the Copa groups, Palmeiras and San Lorenzo go through to the last 16. Independiente drop into the Sudamericana. River Plate and Nacional go through, and Libertad are in the Sudamericana. Anyway, back to the rest of the gossip. Monaco are more advanced than Watford or AC Milan in the race to sign Armando Broja. I can't imagine Watford are in the race. Crystal Palace are in talks with Sunderland over Jobe Bellingham. Brentford are also interested. Like, did I miss something with Jobe Bellingham? Like, I watched Sunderland a few times this season. He had a really good start to the year, but he didn't really impress me all that much. Like, I know he's still very young. He's only 18, and he did score 7 goals from an attacking midfield role. But he doesn't look like a guy that's really ready for another move. He's just gone to Sunderland a year ago. Everton have registered their interest in signing Ross Barkley. He's going to Villa. United are in advanced talks with Kobe Mainoo over signing a big new contract. I don't believe they are. I think that's Football Insider making something up. They will sign him to a big new contract, but it's been specified by real journalists, not spoofers like Football Insider, that it'll be after the summer. They want to take care of all the other stuff they have to do first. Like, they're probably still trying to figure out who the manager's going to be next year, because we still haven't heard anything on Ten Hag a week after the Jacob Steinberg exclusive. Financial experts working with 2-time heavyweight champion boxer Anthony Joshua have held talks with Watford over an investment in the club. I believe he is a Watford lad and a Watford fan. Yes, he is indeed. So that would make sense, to be fair. Right, folks, that's me for the week. I will see you Monday. No, I won't. Monday's a bank holiday. You had your bank holiday. I'm having mine. So I'll see you all on Tuesday. Take care. Enjoy your weekends. Bye-bye.
Social Podcast Network.